listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, February 17th, 2023.
This is a big week.
What? Why?
This is the premiere of Star Trek Picard Season 3. I believe happened yesterday.
Oh.
I think it's the 16th, I believe. So I think that's actually right. It's a new Star Trek series. It's kind of being called TNG Season Last.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, I have nothing to say about it because I haven't watched it yet because I have not
Time
discovered
travel.
Time travel.
Does not yet exist, aside from the travel going forward.
Yeah, it's unidirectional time travel.
We are masters.
At one speed. But yeah, so I think it's that's kind of exciting. We have a new Star Trek.
We don't have to go into it that deep because I haven't seen it yet. I'm sure people are listening that haven't maybe seen it or have their own opinions, but I know that Picard, the show, has been a bit divisive, however you want to say it, amongst fandom. There are, I see two takes on Picard. People love it or people think it's garbage, right? And it sounds like you enjoy it, which is probably good because it's always more fun to enjoy things than not to, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how much of the discourse you have engaged with or looked at with regard to people's complaints about the show, but I think it mostly stems from people like it became a show that people weren't necessarily expecting, and it was definitely became a show that some people did not think it should have been.
Mm-hmm. I think I've actually spoken at least a little bit about maybe season one. Mm-hmm. I think it's fine. It's not my favorite Star Trek. I think other shows have had better seasons. Mm-hmm. But there are some interesting things to it. I think they do some fun things. Mm-hmm. The seasons are maybe not the tightest. I think in general they have more the feeling of they had an idea and then didn't quite execute the idea that well. Especially, I think season one more so, where it's like they had this idea, but by the end of it, you're like, wait, how did we get here? But they have some really, I think, they introduced some great characters across the two seasons, right? What's interesting is that there are people that are not. They're not sparkling Starfleet. In fact, the Starfleet people are all broken Starfleet, right? You basically have Raffi Musiker, who's a former Starfleet, now basically kind of washed up hacker and drug addict. We've got Rios, who's a captain of a little ship, who's a former Starfleet guy who basically got out of Starfleet after having a really rough time. And then we have Elnor, the Romulan warrior nun. Which is like a fascinating character who actually I feel bad that he got kind of shortchanged in season 2 and then basically written out of the show because it was such an interesting character of like, first of all, wait, Romulans have warrior nuns that are like fundamentally different than normal Romulans, and by the way, this kid is one, even though he's not supposed to be because he's not a lady. Right. And of course, 7 of 9 suddenly being a character that's thrust into the narrative, really by season 2, I think a fun way, and in season 3 she continues as well. So I think it's not a bad show. It's probably in certain ways the weakest of the new Star Treks. Although some people will poo-poo Discovery, I think Discovery hits its really finds itself in season 2 and later, and even in season 3. Like season 1 was a rough start. Whereas Picard, like, it kind of had 2 kind of weird seasons, but they're all very focused on the character of Picard. Right. So, like, you kind of have to, you get into that, and it's kind of the idea that Picard isn't perfect. And I think, like, right, because I always joke that in the Next Generation, he's almost universally like the all-wise father who solves all the problems. Right. Yes. Right. And in Picard, it's actually like, you find out, like, no, actually, he didn't solve problems. Sometimes he fucked up, and he feels bad about that. Yeah. And he continues to fuck up. There is a scene in Picard season 1 like the fourth episode where he's on this recolonization planet for the Romulans, and you're watching him basically be a dipshit, and it's almost like cringe. You're like, oh my god, what are you doing, old man? Right? You're watching the old man be stupid, and he gets saved by someone, and you're like, what the hell's wrong with you? So it is, but it's again because he's an old grump to a certain extent. Like, yeah, sometimes he does stupid shit, like threaten to fight a bunch of Romulans or whatever, right? Like,
I mean, we've all been there.
So I think they're an interesting show. I can see. I think some people were upset it wasn't TNG season 3, 8, and 9.
Right.
At least not until now.
Right.
So I think that is. And actually, it's interesting because even Patrick Stewart says that originally his intent was they would never bring the original cast back.
Right.
But yeah, I think they do some good stuff, and I've learned to appreciate even mediocre Star Treks when they have good episodes, right? Like when they have that slapped, right? That was good.
When you mention the conversation and of this even a figurative conversation of like ranking the new Star Treks, do you think the general populace is counting that kid-friendly animated show as part of that, or is that just sort of that's like an ancillary like?
That's a good point. I think some people count Prodigy and some people don't know it exists.
Right.
Straight up.
Fair.
And I don't have anything more to say about that.
Well, let's just stop talking about Star Trek for a while because
let's go, move on to the topic for the week. Let's move on to the topic for the week.
So I finished season 1 of Deep Space Nine, and
not Star Trek.
No, not at all. God, tell me about it. Let me give you a couple reasons why. No, just joking. And as you instructed or suggested that the season finale kind of bleeds right into the opening trilogy, for lack of a better word, of episodes of season 2. And so we rallied and we watched the opening 3 episodes of season 2 as well. And apparently you went and rewatched them, which is great. Although you've probably seen them enough at this point, you probably have them pretty well memorized.
Right, but it's always good to rewatch it to remember the deets.
Sure. And it's an interesting story that's told over these 4 episodes, because one of the promises of the show from the beginning is that it's kind of like it's a show about Federation officers in a non-Federation centric scenario, right? They're just shepherds of this space station, ostensibly working with and or for the Bajorans, right?
Right, the local populace.
Indeed. And these episodes really, despite tinkering with that a little bit throughout the first season, these episodes really like bring it back to that premise in a big, bad way. And in a very Star Trek way, because especially if you look at it through the sort of like historicist lens of like, what it's saying a lot about, I think at the time, like global politics or politics about cultures that were kind of gaining more notice in the international sphere, and kind of making commentary perhaps on other governments. And then through the lens of current society has into a very different, maybe, but just a very different context, I guess. But why don't you set up what these episodes are kind of generally about? How is it engaging with that Bajoran premise? Like the sort of the Starfleet is just sort of the hall monitors of this station.
Well, so what the we start with In the Hands of the Prophets, which was the end of season 1, and this is where we basically are first introduced to the idea of people on factions of people, beliefs, people of certain beliefs on Bajor that are basically not in line with what we expect, or with what we see is the welcome to our station, please help us out, right? We see Bajorans that are actually opposed to a lot of the kind of Starfleet isms that we're used to seeing. And specifically In the Hands of the Prophets, it is literally a conservative religious leader comes to the station to protest the teaching of, let's say, the teaching of science to Bajoran children.
Right.
Now, specifically, it's couched in the context of teaching that the prophets, the people that built the wormhole, are an alien species that lives in a wormhole, as opposed to gods.
Right.
But it's funny because I think you watched it and you sent me a text, something to the fact of like, wow, this is kind of prescient. And it probably wasn't, right? The idea of religious fundamentalists opposing the teaching of science was something that the United States had already experienced, right? But it's just this thing where now, in the year of our Lord 2023, it is like, wow, these people they're Florida, they're
willing to go to violent lengths to
to the point where in the show they bomb the school, right? They blow up the school, and it's like that doesn't feel that far from where we live in the United States right now,
right?
And it's funny because you said that, I was like, well, hold on, because as it ends up, the next 3 episodes are going to lean into this idea of conservative far right Bajorans who not only oppose Starfleet, they oppose like everything, right? They're kind of like creeps. Which leads to a takeover of their government, a military, basically an insurrection, if you will. It's
Oh, I did watch that movie too.
Yeah, but this is different.
That's unrelated. Yeah.
Right. No, this is the insurrection against the government. And it's a weird thing because I think. So we have this conservative group led, the religious side. They're led by a woman named Vedic Wynn, who is played by Louise Fletcher, who, for those who don't know, I think she won like an Academy Award, right? I don't know, yeah. But she's a slapping actor who's probably most notable, other than Deep Space Nine at this point, most notable for playing Nurse Ratched in One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Right. And it's the kind of thing where, I feel bad because I hear she's probably a total. I think I've heard she's a very nice lady, but like she's iconically identified with like just the worst characters, worst characters, right?
Right.
I remember when we first saw this show as a kid, my mother just like, oh, I don't like her. I know she's bad. I'm like, Mom, how do you know that? Like, oh, that's that woman that played Nurse Ratched, and.
She must be evil.
And don't get me wrong, like they lean into that in Deep Space Nine, where they're like, well, actually, yes. In fact, let's make her not a great person. Right, so we see that, and then later the kind of show moves into, now we see the government. We see we find out there's a is it in the beginning of season 2? They say, oh, it's this group. They're very, I think it's Odo who says, yeah, they're very Bajor for the Bajorans, right? Yeah. And when I heard that when we were watching it, my brain immediately went to make Bajor great again, right? Right. Because that's literally what they're saying, right? Yeah. They're like, well, we used to be so great. We need to do that again. And you know what? It's you fuckers are in the way, right? We need to get rid of the Federation. We need to get rid of anyone else, right? It's this very nativist, like I said, Bajor for the Bajorans, make Bajor great again.
Right. Bajor first.
Bajor first, right? And now it's like funny because I've watched this show many times and it never creeped me out as much as it did this time. like yuck, I know what this is. I've seen
context is scary. Additional context, but it also has an interesting. It has an interesting, I guess, statement to make about heroes and heroism and sort of the performative nature of that. Like the idea that we don't necessarily care who you are. We just need you to represent what we want. It reminded me in a lot of ways of, because there's these episodes, right, where, they find a Bajoran
a hero from the occupation, Lee Nollis.
Right.
Who Major Kira rescues.
Right, that's right, yes. And they're like, oh, yeah, no, you're a big hero. And he's like, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But the idea of history and facts can be different. And depending on political need, the narrative that you need for the history you're trying to tell and how you're going to use that history for your own political purposes is more important than what actually happened, right? Because as with a lot of like heroic stories or investigations of heroism, he's not the hero everybody thinks he is. But by the end of the trilogy, he definitely acts heroically, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's to the point where he says, "Look, I'm just a fighting man, right? Like that's what I did. That's what I do." And to the point where he's like, hey, I want to go help with the fighting. And I, no, we need you to be the, we need you as the symbol. He's like, oh, I'm not. I'm good at fighting, though,
Right.
Yeah, and that is this idea that but also acknowledges the power of that kind of symbolism and that narrative, because they're like, oh yeah, and he's being assigned to Deep Space Nine, which is the kind of thing where you're like, oh, that's weird. Why do you take the hero that, like, the whole premise is this is the guy that will unite the people behind one kind of cause, right? Look, it's the hero that helped us defeat the Cardassians. We're all going to unite behind him, and suddenly, like, and he's sent to the space station that's not even near the planet, right?
right.
Which, and you realize, you discover that's intentional, right? That Skeletor wants to keep him from actually being that unifying force.
Frank Langella.
Yeah, you pointed out, you said, oh my gosh, it's Skeletor. I'm like, what?
He played, Frank Langella played Skeletor in the live-action He-Man movie. So we're even being even more niche.
We're too many levels in. But he appears in the episode as basically the first minister of BAJOR, right?
Right.
The president, if you will. A regular trump card,
Right. Hey-yo. Right, but isn't he also kind of... He ends up being sort of like Palpatine-ish, because he's also leading the Circle? Is that right?
Yes, it's the reveal that he's, in fact, also leading the insurrection that's storming the Capitol building.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
What?
No, I'm making American political humor.
Oh, right? Yes. I saw some interesting parallels. I'm not saying that in a modern context it's one-to-one, but with regard to like who you are versus the symbol you represent, it kind of reminded me of, again, I'm not saying that this fits, but it kind of reminded me of Trump in that regard, and how the Republicans kind of used him. Like, he's not conservative. He's not a Republican. But he was saying the things that, and still is saying things that a lot of conservatives want to hear. And, like, he wasn't making policy. And, like, so he became a figurehead. And that's one of the things we're seeing right now in American politics, is, like, they're scrambling because he's kind of lost his luster, and there's no real figurehead, no symbol that is as ralliable as what he represented. And this is kind of like in Deep Space Nine, it's kind of the opposite side. Like, I guess maybe for conservatives, Trump is a hero, but for sane people, perhaps, like what we see in the show is a person being used against their will to represent something that they don't want to represent, and being used as a political pawn. Right. And it's just, the only point I'm trying to make here is that Deep Space Nine, even before the context that we exist in now, in the modern United States existed, is still making clever, interesting choices that all good sci-fi tends to do, which is like, how can we use science fiction to comment on the world around us, right? To explain or problem pose the trials and issues that we are finding ourselves up against. And even better sci-fi is like, hey, like we're saying, it's perpetually useful, right? It's because new contexts always arise, right? History tends to rhyme more than it repeats, and it's just like, 20 years, 30 years later, can still find applicable message in this old ass show, and have it fit our narrative very, very well. It's again speaks to how good the Star Trek writers are, and I guess I'll have to admit, speaks to the quality of Deep Space Nine as well.
Well, and there's in like a season or two, I forget what, I think it's season 2 or 3. There's gonna be a 2-part episode where we're gonna have another conversation about, like, they may have been writing in 1994 or whatever, but they were writing about contemporary America. And it's a weird thing, because actually I kept thinking about this, that when they wrote this series of episodes about this far right military, nativist coup trying to take over the government. Again, they were not writing about the United States. I don't think they were, right? I think they were thinking of whatever. But it's like now, it feels more like the United States to me than it does, because I've, we've seen similar types of things, right? The idea that, they're members of the military that were slavishly devoted to the circle and to this coup. And it's like, and I remember hearing about that, like, is the president going to employ the military? And people said, well, no, they won't follow him. We're like, well, some of them will, that kind of stuff. And right. And it's like, oh man, I'm glad that we're turning into a planet that needs to be under Federation maintenance or whatever.
If that means Cisco's in control, I'm okay with that.
It's like, let's fly out Captain Cisco, man. Right. We need that shit at home. But yeah,
But these episodes also do a lot with Kira.
Yes.
And really kind of do a lot to further her character and further her character and who she is and how she, and her sort of arc over the course of the first season at the very least to pretty impressive degrees.
Yeah, and actually the rewatching it, I forget that in the Hands of the Prophets that she even makes a comment that she's actually basically a supporter of not necessarily Vedic Wind, but of what she represents. And then we get to, by the end of it, we see by the end of the siege, she's very much not, right? It's almost like she's realized how important, how much maybe she's changed her perspectives, and she kind of understands the value of the Federation, and just having her own kind of life course change. And I always like it. She's one of these characters that really does so much. Does so much throughout the show. And I think we've talked about how we start with this character who's basically a terrorist, who has like a military position in the in the provisional military because she was a really good terrorist. Right. And we see her then start to kind of like turn into someone that's like that realizes that this is a different world, that my people need more than just bombs.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sorry, begging the question of where do I won't call them terrorists, but it's like insurrectionist, grassroots sort of rebels go when they win the war, right? Do they just become complacent either politicians or civilians? No, because they, like Kira was dealing with at the beginning. She's like, and as the guy we were talking about earlier, he's like, I'm a fighter. I want to go fighting. And it's like, well, there's technically with the Cardassians gone, not a whole lot of fighting we need to do. We can chill. We won, right? But as God, another incredible commentary is like, civilizations always look for someone to be against, right? Even eventually, in some cases, as we're seeing, as we're seeing right now, at some point, sometimes the mirror turns towards yourself, and you start eating your own, and really, really puts a nice punctuation on, as you said, the kind of character, at least the kind of political views she had at the beginning of season 1, and kind of really is a thorough change or evolution of that sort of archetype into something new and even more interesting, because she's great all the way through the season, and these 3 episodes especially.
Yeah, and I would say that she's definitely one of these characters that continues to have moments where you're like, well, she's facing some challenges.
She's dealing with some stuff, working some stuff, yeah. And I mean, and it doesn't hurt that she also met sexy liberal pope,
sexy pope candidate, sexy bishop,
who's too liberal. He doesn't want to get too crazy because then he'll get kicked out. But like, hey, I'm with you guys, right?
And
then he's like, look at this, look into this magic, look into the magic crystal ball. Because did you have sex with me in the crystal ball? Weird, me too. It's like, this seems a little either predatory or groomy. I'm not really sure which one.
Look into the magic crystal ball, and if you see me naked, let me know. Wink. But it's and that's actually what I will say is that there's an ongoing story that we'll see for a bit about kind of the choosing of the space pope.
Okay.
And so you'll see all these characters again. And I will say that, like, the one thing Deep Space Nine, and I will mention this every time, and they talk about it in the documentary they made about it, like they get to the point where they have all of these non-main characters that, you know, that they always just keep bringing back, right? They're like, well, shoot, how can we bring these people back? I think they always joke that they had like the wall of the main cast, and then they had all the supporting, there's like 50 supporting characters, right? Everything from, you know, Vedic Wynn and Vedic Bareil, Quark's brother Rom, Nog, Garrick the Tailor,
he hasn't come
Gul
back
Dukat.
Yet, but
there's just so many of these characters that they get, you know, they keep coming back to the point where some of them are just regulars. They just don't want to call them that, right?
Right. Actually, there's a cryptic note I left for myself, and I don't know if I necessarily agree, but like I said, the note I left for myself said at the end of episode 1, it ends on Sisko. And I'm like, which is, it feels like it's giving him, it feels like it's creating an important story moment for him. But as I've said before in the show, at least in season 1, they don't really do a lot with Sisko. And it's like, it feels like it should be a punctuation on an arc like we got with Kira at the end of the 3rd episode of season 2. But like, they didn't really, he doesn't really have an arc in season 1. And I don't blame them because, yeah, they have, 26 episodes, but they have a huge cast. They have an entirely new show and an entirely new premise that they need to establish. As long as he's doing captainy stuff, he's good, you know? And they do some interesting stuff with him, but again, as I've said before, I'm interested to see when Sisko kind of becomes Captain S Sisko, right? Or capital S, sorry, Sisko. And again, he still has his hair and his clean shaven. It's just wait for that, right?
The 2 steps, right? The goatee and the shaved head.
Okay, goatee comes first. All right.
It's I think because I think the goatee shows up and then he shaves his head shortly thereafter, and that's when you're like, oh, okay, yeah, we brought Sisko on board. And I mean, we always joke that like it's not only does he look different, it does feel like he plays different. Because actually they talk about it because that's how he prefers to be. He shaves his head and has a goatee. They wanted him to have not that look when they cast him. Yeah. There's some racism there that I think we already talked about. It
definitely feels that they're trying to make him be kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Not as infallible as Picard, but definitely like he's a moral center. And we see him, you know, how he interacts with the son and how empathetic he is with other characters. But he is just kind of like a stick in the mud most of the time for his appearances in episodes. But, you know, it works. It does the job. But I'm excited. We got if what happens with Kira at the beginning of season 2, if other characters get that level of attention and depth and growth.
And it's funny because I start thinking like yes.
And I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Well, I think this is the ongoing joke is that, you know, characters in Deep Space Nine go through more in a season than some characters did in 7 of TNG.
Sure.
That's not universally true, but like there's just a lot more going on. But I to me, I kind of I like to think a little bit about this idea that of how much of these writers writing a television show in the early to mid 90s end up capturing themes that just still resonate today. And I mean, I'm thinking of episodes you haven't seen as well, but like how they have so many, like for a show that feels like it, you know, they definitely gets more serialized as they go on. It becomes more of a story about a world rather than an episodic exploration. You know, but they have, you know, there are episodes, so many episodes where it's like, wow, this is about us, right? This is about the American experience, whether it be whatever American experience that is, and it only feels more so now than it did when they wrote it. Just wait till you get to this. Never mind, I'm not going to say it.
Well, what season is that?
There's one that directly addresses homelessness. Okay. And again, they wrote it in the 90s thinking like, gosh, it's a homeless problem, and now it's like, oh my god.
Interesting. All right. Well, I'll keep my eyes out.
Yeah. So the big takeaway though, starting season 2, got to see the Mabas. No, wait. There's no way to say make Bajor great again.
Oh, yeah.
Mibgas.
No, that sounds no.
Yeah, no. Let's
No.
not say that.
Let's cut that out.
We got to see
the Bajor Firsters.
Bajor Firsters. Got to see a little bit of that, and you got to meet one of the iconic spoiler villains of the series, Vedic Wynn.
Yeah. So Insurrection keeps coming back.
Brilliantly cast, and she keeps coming back. Hell, I actually think, although she's not credited as a regular, she's certainly in every of the last 8 episodes, she's in every one.
Oh, okay. Does Steven Weber keep coming back?
No, Steven Weber. Okay, and then of course, as we go around of random guest actors that were like, wait, who the hell? Yes, Steven Weber, who known mostly, I think, for his work on the 1990 to 1997 NBC sitcom Wings. He's just in it.
Isn't he also the? Maybe I'm thinking of the other brother from Wings. I thought he was the voice of Superman in the animated series.
I don't know.
Don't worry about it.
But what Steven Weber is he's not nameless. He's named Colonel Day, which when you realize that's his family name and that those go first, you realize his name is like Day Bobby or something, or Day Steve, which is just weird. Day-O. Yeah, no. So Steven Weber. So I think it's a fun guest star thing of. Yeah. This is a guy who actually was already in this pretty popular NBC comedy series, just being like, "Hey, I'll go do your Star Trek for a day."
Without diving into huge spoilers, maybe you don't have the seasons down as pat as you do for TNG. What do I have to look forward to in season 2? Anything that's really kind of season 2's known for that is exciting and cool and paradigm shifting?
There definitely there's some big episodes that pop up. You get to learn a little bit more about the Trill in that process.
Nice.
But the important thing is, and this is anyone that knows the Star Trek world knows kind of where I'm going with this. Season 2 of Deep Space Nine is where they introduce basically the vehicle for Voyager.
Oh, really?
Which is basically a group of rebels, Federation rebels in the area. That they oppose the. You saw a little bit of it in TNG season 7, where people that oppose the way that the treaty with the Cardassians divided territory.
Right. So right.
Yeah. So they become a force in season 2 of Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
They're introduced, and that's the joke being that they're only introduced to fuel Voyager, because the whole point of Voyager is made up of a starship and the crew of this rebel ship together on the same ship.
Gotcha. When does Voyager launch?
I believe it launches around this time. I think it launches the next year. Right, because it's TNG ends, and then the next year Voyager starts up, I believe.
Wow, that's okay, yeah. Give DS9 some time to breathe, guys. I'm just saying.
And then at the end of season 2, you get your first sampling of what Deep Space Nine is going to do on its own.
Oh, okay.
With season 3 being really where Deep Space Nine goes in its direction.
So when it becomes capital D, capital S, capital 9.
Yeah. To the point where, and this is not a big spoiler, but they blow up a Galaxy class starship at the end of season 2, just to demonstrate this ain't TNG, right? It's not the Enterprise, but they joke like, yeah, we blew up the Enterprise looking ship, just to say this ain't your TNG, man.
Is this how the season finale ends? It just zooms in on Cisco and he looks in the camera and says, "This ain't your daddy's Star Trek."
Yeah.
Fade to black.
Fade to black.
Yeah, nice. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on other social media where Andrew and I do our business, which means you can find me on Instagram at dbethelcomics. You can find Andrew on Mastodon at profounddark at dice.camp.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube. There you will find our YouTube page. And it is full of this show, where you may already be listening to it there, because we do recirculate. We do upload the show to YouTube.
There we go.
So if you are listening there, do like and subscribe, or as the kids like to say, ring that bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. They're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire. You can find his music and more at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 attribution license. If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to leave some sort of review, whether a text review or using the proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. All right, let's stop talking about Star Trek, Andrew. We have to stop.
Okay, we have to stop.
I want to wrap it up. I want to talk about this this movie I saw. It's called Star Trek Insurrection. It's really interesting because, like, I saw people shit talking it, but it turned out to, like, they're like, oh, it's just a movie length episode, and after I saw it, I'm like, yeah,
that's why it's
that's
good.
great. I mean, it was fun. It was fun as hell. It was a good time. So you know what? Insurrection haters. Oh, I should not shorten it to that. Star Trek Insurrection haters. Shame on you. Not to bring it back to DS9 either, but here we go.
You got to see a movie with Khonshu in it.
I did.
Which is funny because now almost like it to me, F. Murray Abraham was always the facelift alien from Insurrection. So now it's like, oh, now if I go back, I'd be like, damn, he just sounds like Khonshu.
But yeah, it was good times, and I'm just excited to round out the Next Generation movie saga with what is likely to be a fantastic entry called Star Trek Nemesis. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So expect me to come back here next week a little disappointed.
Why? I wonder why that is.
I might put that off for a couple weeks because I have heard how not good that movie is. I'm not gonna say bad. I haven't seen it.
No, you could say bad. You could say bad.
What? As a young Tom Hardy, is he doing his Bane voice the whole time?
I've been told that the movie is the only Star Trek film to actually lose money at the box office.
Well done. Well, hey, that's just us moving towards a moneyless future. So they're on track. So until you contribute to the future you want, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast. That's right. So it's like, I got 3 vectors of bad decisions. Right?
and oh my God, are you an android?
Android, yeah.
Not the episode title.
But humor.
But previous times, I'm like, oh God, they're going to ask about alcohol, aren't they? Oh God, what did I say? Are they going to tell my mom? What are we talking about? Are we talking about DC9? Star Trek cast, apparently. Jesus. Here we go.
That's okay.
No, it's all great. It's bootyful.